Cities across the country are facing what the nonprofit Ecology Center has called a slow-moving recycling crisis. Towns are struggling to deal with piles of plastic, paper, scrap metal, and other materials with no clear destination.
This comes after China stopped accepting the bulk of American recycling last year. Now American cities are starting to end or scale back recycling programs altogether. CBS News MoneyWatch reporter Irina Ivanova writes about this very topic in her new article on our website, and she joins us now. So this is all brand new to me. How did we come to be dependent on China to process our recycling?
That's a great question. China, for many, many years, has been the major buyer of scrap plastic, scrap cardboard from all industrialized countries. It's not just the U.S., but we were very dependent on them for a while. Last year, I think they bought something like 2/3 of all the scrap plastic we shipped out.
Wow.
And the reasons are complicated, but one of the reasons is because their standards for what they'll take, for the recycling products that they'll take, were a lot lower than other countries. There's something called, this is a little bit technical, there's something called contamination level. So when you send out a scrap bale of, say, number 5 plastic, it's mostly number 5 plastic, but sometimes you have other things in there. People will throw like a sneaker in the recycling bin, things like that. It doesn't always get sorted out, and for a long time, China had a pretty low, for a long time, China had a pretty high standard for how much contamination it would accept. Just over a year ago, they said, nope, we're not going to do that anymore. They set a very, very low standard for contamination that essentially banned most plastic imports.
Oh, that's interesting.
So now we're sending this stuff to Southeast Asia. We've said China is no longer accepting it because they've actually tightened their restrictions, and now we're going to find another country that doesn't have tight restrictions.
Right. So we were doing that for a while. What's happened is because there's so much plastic that we're talking about, a lot of the Southeast Asian countries have now been overwhelmed, and they have also put in their own plastic bans. Vietnam, Malaysia, India was the latest to do it. So there's all these tons of plastics basically floating around with no clear home.
So then is this the end of recycling as we know it? Because I imagine now, if you got to go through all the stuff and make sure there's no contaminants, recycling gets a lot more expensive.
That's exactly what's been happening. And it's not quite the end of recycling, but there's a bit of an existential crisis because a lot of cities are finding it's suddenly a lot more expensive than it used to be to recycle. So different places are dealing with this in different ways. Some cities are still recycling, but they're paying a lot more for it. There's a lot of places. So Berkeley, I talked with somebody there yesterday, and the person who runs the recycling program said, you know, we used to get paid $100 a ton for scrap cardboard. Now they're getting paid, you know, $20 a ton.
Wow.
Now in California, because land is very expensive, it's still more expensive to send it to the landfill. So their recycling still makes sense. A lot of smaller cities, rural towns, they're finding it's cheaper to just send things to the landfill. So that is happening in a lot of places.
Wow. You know, I recall, and I don't remember exactly where I saw it, but because we're talking about is this the end of recycling and what's the solution to all of this, I saw an advertisement once where it was a bicycle. It was a piece of scrap metal, and it said, "I want to someday be a bicycle." And you know, and there was some kind of a marketing campaign around, you know, from this junk comes this wonderful thing that will fill somebody's life with joy. And I wonder if that's a way for people to think about recycling in a way for perhaps local governments, the federal government, to entice people to continue to do this. Because it doesn't seem as right now as if we're able to get a fix on it or get a hold of it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We're still, you know, looking for a fix, and there's been a lot of suggestions thrown out. I think what you've described is one thing that people are trying to do to just raise awareness of, you know, all this waste we're putting out. You know, there is a bit of a movement to reuse stuff more, so we're not, you know, putting things in the recycling bin with the hope that it'll be made into something new, but say you have a container and you just reuse it. You know, people are trying to do things like avoid packaging, you know, bring your own container, things like that, but it's definitely a big problem that's still looking for a long-term solution.
Irina, really good reporting. Thank you so much for sharing it with us and for talking about it. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.